Good morning. Welcome to Saturday Finance. Happy to have you here. And would you please call the roll?
Senator Buck. Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Neal. Senator Wen. Senator Stone. Senator Taylor. Senator Titus. Chair Dondero Loop.
And I am here, and please mark Senator Wynn present when she arrives. She's off presenting a bill, so we may have some in and out this morning. All right, with that, just a reminder to mute the cell phones. You all know the drill, and so I won't take time doing that. And we will be hearing Assembly Bill 499, so we will call up Speaker Yeager. Welcome.
Well, good morning, Chair Dondero Loop, members of the Senate Finance Committee. Happy, beautiful Saturday morning in Carson City. My name is Steve Yeager. I represent Assembly District 9, which is in southwest Las Vegas. Down in Las Vegas, we have Mr. Bradley Schrager at the table as well, and he is here mostly to help answer any questions the committee may have. It is an honor to present Assembly Bill 499 to you this morning. All of you should have a mock-up amendment to the bill that has made significant changes. I know that's posted on Nellis as well, so I will be working off of that mock-up in today's presentation. Over the past week or so, I have been in discussions with the governor's office on a path forward on providing ballot drop boxes for voters in the period between the end of early voting and Election Day. Something that I know will increase voter access and will speed up the processing and counting of ballots. As you all know, many voters make their decision on whom to vote for in the last days heading into Election Day. And the number of ballots that the clerks and registrars get on Election Day creates lines and backlogs in the voter tabulation process. One of the best ways we can speed up the counting of the vote is to allow voters an opportunity to drop off their ballots in the 3 days between early voting and Election Day when they've made their final decision. Now, I know all of you have knocked on doors and spoken with voters, and that's always an interesting time because you talk to a voter on that Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, and they'll often ask how they can vote, and you're not sure if you should tell them to put the ballot in the mail because it might not make it there in time, so their only option is to go on Election Day. This would provide additional options for that voter to fill out their mail-in ballot and place it in a drop box over the weekend. And I believe that will help speed up the process by getting more ballots in faster. If the clerks are able to process some of those drop box ballots over the weekend before the election, it's going to speed up the count. Right now, there are literally tens of thousands of ballots that are put in drop boxes on Election Day when election officials are trying to actually conduct the election. Now, earlier on in this session, both houses of the legislature passed Assembly Bill 306. Assembly Bill 306 required a certain number of drop boxes in Clark and Washoe counties in those days between the end of early vote and Election Day. Governor Lombardo ultimately vetoed that piece of legislation. In conversations with the governor regarding that veto and Assembly Bill 306, he made clear that he wanted additional measures related to those drop boxes, as well as a voter ID bill that would seek to implement Question 7 in order to meet, as best we can, mutual concerns about the election process. As you know, Question 7 is a voter ID constitutional amendment that was approved by the voters in 2024, but that must still be approved once more at the 2026 general election and then be implemented by subsequent legislation. Chair, I wanted to mention as well that I did include as an exhibit for this committee's consideration the actual full text of ballot question number 7, so I'll reference that on occasion, but I think looking at the text of the ballot initiative is very helpful to figure out why the bill is structured in the way that it is. So what is before you today is the legislation that has resulted from the conversations that I've had with the governor. Now, before I proceed into an explanation of the mock-up amendment, let me first talk about why doing it this way is the best path forward for Nevada. First, if question 7 were to pass at the next election cycle and the 2027 legislature addresses the issue then, the implementation issue, it would leave us a very short window for implementation and voter education leading into the 2028 election. Barely 6 months after the end of the next session, the 2027 session, Nevada will have its presidential preference primary with what is likely to be competitive races for both parties, followed by intense primary and general elections that include the presidency of the United States, a U.S. Senate seat, all 4 Nevada congressional races, and of course, our state and local offices, including many of us. That is very little time to both implement the measure effectively and to educate voters on how to vote under these new rules, which will be a sea change in the way we cast ballots in this state. Something as critical and foundational to America as the right to vote must be implemented in a thoughtful, methodical way that makes it as convenient as possible for Nevada voters to satisfy ID requirements. And that is what we are attempting to do with this bill. Any change of this nature to the voting system increases voter confusion and error, and we want to ensure that we are mitigating that as best as we can and as early as we can. Additionally, the language and structure in this bill is based on conversations with local clerks and election officials over the past several months and has been developed based on their expertise to make it possible for them to successfully implement identification and verification requirements for Nevada's elections. I want to be very clear. The core of the bill's provisions regarding voter ID came directly from the constitutional amendment proposed by the governor. Now, Madam Chair, I can walk you through the proposed amendment and the appropriations that are included as well. First, the amendment requires all voters who vote in person, whether during early voting or election day, to present photo identification. This includes various accepted forms of identification, such as driver's licenses, passports, military ID, or a digital ID issued by the Secretary of State. If a voter does not have one of those forms of ID, they can still vote using a provisional ballot, but they must present a valid ID by 5 p.m. on the Friday following the election for that ballot to count, in much the same way that voters have always cast provisional ballots in our state. To ensure that the new ID requirements do not become a barrier for low-income voters who lack forms of ID, and there are tens of thousands of them in Nevada, the amendment requires the Department of Motor Vehicles to issue free state ID cards to any registered voter experiencing financial hardship. Additionally, it directs the Secretary of State to issue free digital ID cards upon requests, though the Secretary of State will have until 2028 to have those digital IDs up and running. An aggressive voter outreach program to voters who lack ID will be a necessary feature of implementing this law. This amendment also makes important changes to mail-in voting procedures. Specifically, it requires voters to write an identifying number, either the last 4 digits of their driver's license. If they don't have a driver's license, then their last 4 of their social security number, or if they don't have either of those, their voter registration number on their mail ballot return envelope along with their signature. Now, I want to make it very clear. This is the exact language and exact order of identification that is specified in the Question 7 constitutional amendment, the exact language. The people who brought you Question 7 demanded the inclusion of this information in this exact way, and so this bill must follow the language of what is likely to become part of the Nevada Constitution. Including these numbers may not have been my preferred way of proceeding with mail ballots in conjunction with the voter ID requirement, but it is what the proponents of Question 7 have mandated in the language. If neither the voter's signature nor the voter's ID can be verified from the return envelope, election officials are required to contact the voter and have them cure their ballot by the deadline, much as they do now when signatures are determined not to match. As I mentioned, Assembly Bill 499 now also adds new rules for ballot drop boxes. Counties with large populations, Clark and Washoe, are now required to provide a minimum number of secure, monitored drop box locations during the days between early voting and Election Day, meaning that Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of the final weekend. A drop box location must be available for at least 7 hours on each of those days, but no more than 12 hours on any of those days. They can only be placed at locations that have previously been selected as an early vote or Election Day polling location. They must be monitored at all times while in use, and they must be secured and unable to accept ballots in the off hours. Lastly, the amendment establishes a statewide voter services portal hosted by the Secretary of State. This portal will allow voters to review their registration, view sample ballots, find polling places, and access forms to update their information. And eventually, they'll be able to get their digital ID there as well. County clerks will be required to include QR codes on all mailings that link voters directly to this portal. There are some additional technical amendments to Assembly Bill 499 that were presented during its hearing in Legislative Operations, the Senate Legislative Operations and Elections Committee. Finally, and perhaps more importantly for this committee, this bill appropriates $548,528 to the Department of Motor Vehicles to provide free state IDs to those who need them. And you may be asking where I came up with that number. I submitted for the exhibit, or for the record, a copy of a fiscal note from a bill from the last legislative session. That was Senate Bill 405. That was the governor's voter ID bill that ultimately did not get enacted, but the fiscal note is from the DMV estimating how much money they would need to provide free IDs to those experiencing financial hardship. So you have that for the record, and I think that's probably the best estimate I can come up with based on the DMV's fiscal note from last session. So that's the first appropriation. In addition, there's a $3.2 million appropriation to the Secretary of State's office to fund a voter education campaign on how this new voting system will work and how to properly vote under these new rules. Now, I understand and appreciate that this will be a particularly challenging and difficult bill for some to support. But I also believe we have a duty to move forward in a thorough and thoughtful fashion to avoid confusion later on. Nevada has some of the most secure and accessible elections in the country, and this bill is a set of compromises between the legislature and the governor that I believe can ensure that tradition continues. With that, Madam Chair, I'm incredibly grateful for the time this morning, and I, along with Mr. Schrager, are available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, and I'll start with Senator Wynn.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a chance to review this last night, the amendment, as well as kind of comparing it to the full text of question 7. Obviously, question 7 you had indicated will be back on the ballot, and given the success of this measure during this last election cycle, I tend to agree with the statements that you made during your presentation. Do we have any concerns that the language proposed in this amendment in any way conflict or would be overridden by this? I know you kind of answered it, but have we done this with other ballot initiatives in the past where we're not able to take them off the ballot, but we're able to incorporate, I guess, what will ultimately be included in the law should this pass again the second time? And I know that was very rambling and a lot of lecturing, so hopefully you found a question in there somewhere.
Steve Yeager for the record. So to your question, I mean, in crafting this legislation, we had question 7 right in front of us, right? Because as I said, there are some things I don't particularly appreciate about how question 7 is written, but I do believe this is going to be enacted by the voters, and then we're going to be, we or whoever is in these seats in the next legislative session is going to have to implement this. And just by way of reminder, this is a constitutional amendment, so this isn't something that the legislature can come and change in 2027. We could start a process of trying to change it, but that's a 5-year process, as you know. So I do not believe there's anything that you have in front of you in Assembly Bill 499, the mock-up to Assembly Bill 499, that would conflict with question 7. And so, again, I've gotten some questions about, well, how do these verification numbers work on the mail-in ballots? Why is it driver's license first, and then Social Security, and then voter ID number? That's exactly exactly how it's stated in section C of the ballot initiative. So I don't think we can do anything other than mandate that that be included on the ballot and in that particular order and verified in that particular manner. So I don't know, Mr. Schrager could probably answer. I'm sure that we've had situations before where there are ballot initiatives that we believe are going to pass, and we've tried to do implementing legislation earlier. I'm not aware of that, but to answer your first question, there's nothing that I believe would conflict. Obviously, maybe a court's going to look at the question, the language in question 7, and if they find something to not be constitutional, then obviously whatever's in the statute would be stricken as well. But I think this is the most faithful and efficient and effective way to implement the language in question 7 in a statutory manner so that we can actually do the next election using this process, which I think will help us in 2028 to make sure that we have a smooth election and everyone's able to participate. But Chair, if you would allow, perhaps Mr. Schrager can answer the second part of that question.
Mr. Schrager, please go ahead when you're ready.
Speak directly to the member in response to that question. This bill is meant to be the implementing legislation for question 7, and so it tracks and complies exactly. So we don't believe that there are any conflicts in the language between this and the bill. I believe historically there have been instances of implementing companion legislation along with impending ballot measures. Sometimes they have come in the form of implementing legislation for constitutional amendments that come through the legislative process as opposed to the popular initiative process, but it is not unheard of. It is rare as are amendments to our Constitution, but it is not something that sort of comes out of the blue. And in this particular instance, as Speaker Yeager points out, there's a responsibility aspect to this to not go rushing headlong into a process for the 2028 election without implementing legislation, in which case it would be either the responsibility of the courts or of a future legislature to do that essentially under the gun with the impending 6 months later opening of the presidential primary filing for an election shortly thereafter under untested conditions. So that's really the basis for this legislation, but I do not believe there are any clear conflicts between this and question 7.
Thank you, Chair, for the follow-up. Thank you for that response. Obviously, I see this. So if we did nothing right now, and we would wait for this to come back on the ballot again in 2026, where presumably it would pass. And then how much time would we have to formulate the regulatory structure to implement this if it was to pass on a ballot?
Steve Yeager for the record. So if this legislature did nothing, we didn't implement this, as you noted, it'll go to the voters in the 2026 election. Assuming that it passes, it would be up to the next legislature. So I don't know what the start date is, but February of 2027, and we would essentially need to write legislation and implement during the legislative session. So, and there's appropriations in the bill too, so that would wait until the waning days of session, much as this bill has, because there are appropriations. So I think probably at best, we would have something ready and passed by June of 2027. And that doesn't give a lot of time for clerks to be able to adjust. It doesn't give a lot of time for voters because, as you noted, it's almost 6 months later, you're already in the presidential preference primary because 2028 is going to be quite a year in Nevada, I think, with our purple state status. So, and you think about what would have to happen in that 6 months. The election clerks have to prepare. Folks have to realize that voting has changed, because they're used to voting in a certain way, and particularly when it comes to mail ballots. Now you're going to have to add additional information to that ballot, and if you don't, your vote's not going to get counted. So I think the idea here is, rather than put ourselves in a situation where we have to massively change the way we vote in 6 months, let's get this off the ground now, and part of that appropriation here for the Secretary of State is so we can educate voters about how to do this, because I think the concern I have is, if we wait and we don't do this now, we're really going to be in untested water going into the 2028 election, and I want to try to avoid that. So that's essentially what it would look like. This gives us a 2-year head start, It also allows us, if we find it advisable, we'll see how this works if we implement this in the 2026 election, but we'll have a 2027 session before the next election in 2028. So if something is not working in here and we need to come back and change it as a legislature, obviously in a way that doesn't conflict with the constitutional provisions, but we would be able to do that. Or if we need to allocate additional money for free identification, if we need to allocate additional money for voter outreach, we'll have a whole cycle. So that's really the idea here. I think, again, this may not be, my favorite policy to have to implement, but I think as a legislature, we have a responsibility to do this. If we were in session every year or we had a longer session, maybe we could wait. But I think it would be prudent of us to do this now, have a cycle of elections under this provisions, and then we can make any changes that we need to in the 2027 session.
Thank you, Chair. And
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if I may, briefly.
Please, go ahead.
Bradley Schrager. Thank you, Madam Chair. Bradley Schrager, once again, for the record. Further to that, the member, Senator Wynn, brought up the counter for the regulatory framework. If in fact there are sort of sub-legislative activities that must go on, the Department of Motor Vehicles must prepare. There's the possibility of implicating potential work by the various health districts on vital records. They can only do those things in response to enacted legislation. So if that happened in June of 2027, the window and period within which those regulatory agencies would be able to enact the things they need to do the will of this legislature, that would put us in a very precarious situation, almost certainly forcing emergency regulations as opposed to considered regulatory activity by those bodies. That would have to happen between, say, the beginning of June and October of 2027. So that further supports the need for early action on this bill.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't have any further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Speaker, for continuing to work on a discussion that we had regarding, hey, we haven't done anything to improve these voter issues and create a little bit better process in our state, so I appreciate that. I have a number of questions, if I might, Madam Chair. So working off the copy that you presented of the amendments on page 28, so when we eliminate a signature verification, is that because now we won't have to worry about if we like the signature or not because we're using the ID? It's at the very top, and it was just struck from existing language. So page 28, at the very top, it's language that we have in law now about signature provided by a person pursuant to this paragraph must be compared to the one that's on there. So will we no longer be needing, I believe, and it's page 28 of the mock-up, Amendment 31114, at the very top. So I know one of the signature verifications is that comparing of how my handwriting looks now compared to my handwriting when I was 18 and registered to vote. They're not even close to being the same on my signature. So just will that be replaced by strictly ID?
Steve Yeager, for the record, I would defer that question down to Mr. Schrager. It looks to me that this section is about automatic voter registration.
Mr.
Yes,
Schrager,
thank you,
go
Madam
ahead.
Chairman. Yes, thank you very much. Once again, Bradley Schrager, for the record. To the senator's question, I want to sort of clarify. There is nothing in this bill that does away with signature verification. Signature verification remains the primary method through which mail-in ballots will be accepted. The basic process will be that, as now, voters will put their signature on their mail-in ballot. They will also be required to put one of the three sets of numbers that the constitutional amendment calls for. The signature verification remains the first step. If the signature is verified, then the ballot is accepted. Now, that voter still must include one of the three numbers, but only upon a signature mismatch or in the judgment of the clerks that there is a question regarding the signature, then they would go to the other numbers to verify. So the two would work in tandem, but there will be nothing changed about the first step, which is signature verification of a voter signature on the mail ballot.
So can you tell me what's justified about striking that paragraph then on 28?
This particular paragraph is not in the portion that deals with the verification of the signature for the purposes of casting a ballot by the clerks. This particular paragraph is embedded in the registration paragraphs. So it alters that, but having nothing to do with the verification of your ballot when you vote.
Fair enough, but you're still striking it, and I'm just wondering why. Is it?
I will have to return. I'm sorry. We will have to return to the member with that information.
All right, very good. I mean, yeah, I don't want to get hung up on that, but I would like ultimately an answer when you have time. I didn't have the advantage of having this last night, so I'm looking at this morning. So trying to get through as much as possible. Follow-up question, if I might, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So at what point, I've been filtering through all of this, and what is a Dropbox? First off, a Dropbox question. What is going to be the security around those drop boxes? Will it be somebody will be there in person for those 7 to 12 hours monitoring these drop boxes? Will there be recordings? Is there going to be a monitor so we can review film afterwards where these drop boxes are and always have some video surveillance of these drop boxes?
Steve Yeager for the record. I was just looking for the section because the drop boxes are in a couple different places, but the way that this is envisioned is, I believe it's left to the Secretary of State by regulation to determine. There is a provision that they have to be secured and monitored, but we did not put what that would be in the bill itself. So I envision what would happen is, we'd go through the regulatory process, which of course is an open process. As you are aware, those regulations would have to come before the Legislative Commission. But I wanted to at least, first of all, I guess I'll say this. So we have drop boxes already, and those drop boxes that exist already are at early voting sites or they are at the election day site. The original version of the Dropbox bill, the one that got vetoed, did not mandate where the new drop boxes would be. We left that to the clerks, thinking that was probably good to have some local control. In my discussions with the governor, he did not like that idea that there wasn't more prescriptive language. And so the language you see in this bill is different than the bill that was vetoed, because we've now said that those drop boxes in Clark and Washoe can only be at a place where there are already drop boxes. So there's not going to be a new drop box location that pops up. And so I envision it'll look much like that already looks, right? Those drop boxes are there, they're being used during the day, they're secured at night, but I didn't want to put very prescriptive language in here because I think that's something that I'd like a little more public input into in terms of how that works. So it is left to regulation by the Secretary of State in the bill about what those parameters would be.
Thank you. Follow-up, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit regarding the voter ID and the signature, and showing voter ID. Certainly, I, as the majority of citizens, have voted that we support a form of voter ID. At what point, looking at all of this, at what point is it just when they get their voter ID at the DMV? At what point do they document that they're actually entitled to vote?
I think it's a right, isn't it?
Steve Yeager, for the record, I don't know that I can that's really a Secretary of State and registrar question. I mean, this bill does not touch upon that in any way. I think the question you're asking is how do you ensure that when you register to vote, you're actually legally entitled to vote? I don't know if someone from the Secretary of State is here. I do know in prior hearings that they've indicated that they verify citizenship status at the time of registration.
And so, and again, just follow up on that one. So is it at the, and it's a process, and maybe somebody from the DMV or the Secretary of State's office can clarify for me, because I think the biggest question I get asked on both sides is, so we want everybody who's entitled and has the right to vote to be able to vote. And at that point, is it just that they sign up at the DMV and they say, yeah, I have the right to vote, and so it's just they verify that? Or is there where's that other step? Because for my constituents, that's the biggest concern. We want everybody to vote who should and have the right to vote, but where's that step, that first step, that is that person, and they do indeed have that right to vote? And I just need that clarified, certainly for my constituents.
Steve Yeager, for the record, I'll get an answer from the Secretary of State or clerks for that, because I don't want to misstate, but I do know I've been in hearings where we were assured that is checked at the time of registration. But I'll get a better answer for you so you can convey that to your constituents.
We have an expert up here with us, but he's not in that position anymore. So
I'm happy to.
I'm gonna let Mr. Thorley weigh in on a couple things, but I just want to make a statement that he is not with the Secretary of State's office any longer, but he does have some institutional knowledge, and I'll let him weigh in to where he's comfortable.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For that, Wayne Thorley, for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division, not with the Secretary of State's office. So to answer a couple of your questions, Senator Titus, going back to section 6.5, as I read the bill. So just let me take a step back. In general, this amendment requires that in order to vote in person in any election, a registered voter must verify his or her identity by presenting certain forms of photo identification. What section 6.5 then is doing is conforming changes. So existing law in NRS 293.57691 relates to automatic voter registration and the transmittal of the signature that the DMV receives to the election officials. And then it says that signature in existing law can be used or compared against when a person presents in person to vote. That will no longer be needed because this bill, with this mock-up, would no longer require signature in person when you present to vote. It would require photo identification, one of the eligible forms of identification. So it's just conforming changes. That's section 6.5. To your other question regarding determination of eligibility to vote, that is not something, oh great, Secretary of State's here. That is not something that the DMV is statutorily required to do. That is a requirement on the election officials to determine eligibility to participate in the election.
Thank you for that. Can I ask a question, Madam Chair? Oh, thank you. So on that end, then it's going to be it's going to be a top-down verification where the county clerks aren't going to verify that person, typically they send them a card that, hey, you've registered, here's your card, documenting that, and when the clerk sends that card out, to confirm that they truly do live at that address, and I've been told in the past they get these cards back, they don't do anything, they just throw them away. Just that documentation that person is who they say they are, and they are entitled and have the right to vote. And I think that's the disconnect with all of this. And I think that's where the biggest pushback. They have this ID, they show up, they go there, and they say, hey, I'm John Smith, I live at this address, and I need an ID, I can't afford it, I'm going to sign all this. Nothing else. Now they get an ID and now they're a voter.
I'm going to go ahead, if you don't mind, Senator. I'll shift to the table, and I'll let the Secretary of State's office weigh in. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Gabriel DeCara, Chief Deputy Secretary of State for the record. Thank you for the question. Senator Titus, I think I understand the question. I want to say that the Secretary of State's office, we do not register voters. County clerks register voters. So while, for example, some of the changes in this legislation and other legislation may change where some of this messaging comes from, may change who is doing certain mailings or communicating messages to voters. Voters will not be registered without review and confirmation from the county clerk's office. The Secretary of State's office does not have the power to register voters. It has to go through the county. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, because I think it's really key. We're talking about the top down, and in this bill, we talk about it. You struck out county clerk language in many paragraphs, and now it's going to go to the Secretary of State. So they're going to have the information, they're going to have the registrations, but then you're still going to amend, it's still the responsibility of county clerks to verify that they are indeed have the right to vote. And so I think that's the concern I'm hearing from some county clerks and my constituents about that step, that everything's now top down, but at the end of the day, the county clerks are still the ones that are going to be the ones responsible for verification that person is indeed the person they say they are and that they have the right to vote. So is that a correct analogy?
Gabriel DeCare for the record. Thinking of the question, Senator Titus, yes, that is correct. A number of these changes in this bill that replace Secretary of State with county clerks, it is just for, so for example, we don't want every single county to have to set up their own individual portal but the work, the verification all still happens at the county level. It just happens through that top-down system.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair, for all the questions. I know those are policy questions, but this is the only opportunity we have for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, I didn't have this amendment last night. So just so you know that the amendments were here on our desk. All right, with that, we will go to Senator Neal. I believe she had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have a couple. So on Section 8, I was looking at it's Section 8, lines 31 through 33. Actually, we might as well just take 30 through 36. So the first part of this question is, when we think about the regular process for failing to sign the envelope, what is the error rate of that, and how many of those ballots are kicked out because of the error rate or failing to sign the envelope?
Thank you for the question, Senator Neal. Gabriel DeCare for the record. I will pull that up right now.
So while you're doing that, can I ask a second question?
Yes.
Okay. So my second question is, how do we deal, and I'm just going to get philosophical a little bit. So there are numerous studies that have said that voter ID in general suppresses voter turnout. And we have to talk about that, right? Because what are we going to do if this has the reverse effect of actually individuals going to go vote because they feel that they don't want to have to share their ID?
Steve Yeager for the record. So a couple things I'll mention there. I mean, one, I think what we're trying to do is implement this in a way that is thoughtful and makes it as convenient as possible for folks to get those IDs and be able to vote. I don't know what impact it's going to have, but I think the voter education portion of this, that appropriation to the Secretary of State to be able to get the word out that the rules are changing, is incredibly important. That's going to obviously fall to all of us as elected officials to have those conversations with our districts and our constituents. And, the more philosophical question, I think I can only answer with, it's my belief that this is going to pass on the next ballot. So it's going to fall on somebody to implement. And so, that's not something I can control. It was put on the ballot. It passed. I think it'll pass again. So, I think we could just try our best to mitigate those impacts, and I think that's what we have in front of us. But,
Madam Chair, follow-up? Please. So another question I had was related to absentee ballots. So, for example, like my daughter, out of state, college student, in master's program, but she's still registered to vote in Nevada. And so I didn't see the section, but what section deals with the absentee ballot and how it is counted when she's a resident? And let's say maybe she didn't put the barcode on, or what is the status of her ballot in when she votes in that manner?
Steve Yeager for the record. I think that might be I think I know the answer, but I would like to defer to Mr. Schrager just so I don't incorrectly state the response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bradley Schrager, once again, for the record, if I can speak directly to the member. If I understand your question, Senator Neal, she's a registered voter who should still then receive a mail ballot. We don't really have absentee ballots in Nevada anymore. They're simply all mail ballots. And so she should be able to still cast her ballot through the mail in that way. And if she still has a Nevada driver's license, she'll be able to put the last four of those numbers. If she does not have a driver's license at the moment, she'll be able to use the last four of her social. Even if she doesn't have that, she'll be able to use her voter registration number if she remains a registered Nevada voter. So this particular bill should not impact, except for the new addition of the inclusion of the 4 digits that would be necessary under not just under this bill, but under the Nevada Constitution. Should question 7 pass, she should be able to vote as normal as she has in the past.
Thank you for that. So on the error rate, have you been able to?
There are a lot of, Gabriel DeCara for the record, apologies, Senator Neal. There are a lot of Excel spreadsheets. I'll be able to give that to you before the end of the hearing. Thank you.
I can sort of speak to that generally, if I might, Madam Chairman. Voter education is, once again, Bradley Schrager for the record. Voter education is going to be absolutely key to this process, because we are adding a requirement that is going to cause issues for some people who will forget to put their numbers down. There's no doubt about that. The fact is, that is the shape and mandate of the constitutional amendment. And so we need to work as best we can to get voters used to this as it comes online. We are also trying through this process to mitigate what has been an historically high number of signature rejections regarding mail-in ballots. This would provide a sort of a cure process, so that if your signature is judged to be a first level mismatch, if you have the numbers proper, then the clerks are required to accept your ballot. So we are sort of we're trying to fix multiple problems while in fact having to deal with what may be a new challenge, which is people getting used to putting these 4 numbers or their voter registration number on their ballot now.
Madam Chair, can I have a follow-up?
Yes, you can.
So, listen, I understand like the reasoning behind why this policy is moving, but like in this committee, we've talked a lot about, people have brought bills related to a person that is dyslexic, where you can actually, it's a form of dyscalculia, right? Where it's like you're not putting your numbers in order. And so when we think about disabled populations and the voter suppression studies that are out there, we have these different subgroupings that now will pop up through the element of having to write your driver's license number or social security number and all those things. And when we talk about curing, when we talk about that process of what is an appropriate last four digits of whatever number, how do we deal with and engage when that subpopulation who has traditionally voted is now somehow disenfranchised because of that kind of disability, of dyscalculia, or, because the reality is that fits more, it's undiagnosed, more so in minority communities who are more so impacted by voter ID. So then you have the subset of the subset, right? So this is our policy conversation because we've never seen it, but I think we should dig into that because there is a reality of passing this policy. So what are we considering when someone says, or it's uncured and they're saying, well, the reason why is because I have dyscalculia. That's not random, it's actually real.
Steve Yeager for the record. A couple things I'll note. If a voter chooses to vote in person, whether it's early vote or whether it's election day, they show the ID. So there's not a need to put the numbers on. We're talking about mail ballots when it comes to the numbers. So that's not a comprehensive answer, but you don't have to use the numbers if you're showing up in person, and that includes voting early in person. But to your broader question of how do we address those issues with particular communities that are going to have challenges, again, I'll note it's the constitutional language, so it's not the language I would have chosen for a ballot initiative, but I didn't write it. So we're faced with having to implement it as written in the Constitution. But I think through the regulatory process and through the voter education process, that to me is where we've got to figure out those issues. We've got to engage communities. What are going to be the challenges? Who are the populations that are going to have challenges? And how do we try to tackle those head on? Are we going to solve all those problems? No, we're not. But I think this gives us a head start in trying to solve those problems. If we wait until the next session, we have just a few months before voting starts. So I hear those concerns. I believe that they're legitimate. I don't have an answer for you today. But I think elevating that concern, and with the partners in this room, many of whom have been heavily involved in voting and voter participation, we've got to try to find a way to mitigate that to the extent possible, although we're never going to mitigate it entirely.
Gabriel DeCara for the record, and to add to that, Speaker Yeager's absolutely correct. Voter education, we know voter education is going to be a incredibly important, as the speaker referenced, would have been regardless with the language in the constitutional amendment. The Secretary of State's office has requested, and I believe there's a bill making its way through potentially in this committee now that will be additional voter education dollars, more voter education dollars than the state of Nevada has ever appropriated in the past to help address some of this. And I want to add that the Secretary of State, Secretary Aguilar, takes language accessibility very seriously. And language accessibility does not just mean translation, but it means making the process fully accessible, using language, using things like visual references that can ideally help. Obviously, in the example of a disability like dyscalculia, that is very complex, but the Secretary of State's office worked with organizations like the Center for Civic Design to try and make what voters see, the things that they need to do to vote as clear and accessible as possible, which with the wording of the amendment is not always easy, but we have time to apply ourselves to that problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Neal, are you finished with your question?
I just have one final, and then I'm.
That's all right.
and
I
then
just
I'm
wanted to
good
make
for
sure
a
before I
while.
went on that I didn't cut you off.
No, I just have, because Speaker Yeager and Mr. Schrager, it's not like I don't understand what you're trying to do, that you're trying to head something off of the past. I'm not acknowledging the logical or your reasoning, right? I'm wrestling with the philosophical issue that I have with voter ID. When it was on the ballot, I was the one on the other side actively saying no and pressuring others to say no. You understand when the constituency was coming? Because my litmus test are the seniors who are a huge base, and I have a majority minority district, who went through the civil rights, who went through the literacy test, who went through the poll tax. Even when my dad passed away, we found his poll tax card that he kept in a box when he passed away in 20. And so for me, I'm wrestling with the constitutional right to vote that is given to us under the 15th Amendment and this form of abridgment of it. And I recognize what you're attempting to do, which is to stave off something worse. But the idea that we're even, that this is a potential vote to take is very difficult, right? Because I'm not in the space where I am openly willing to disenfranchise a population that may not even understand this law as written. Because currently, even when we did the election centers and Senator Pat Spearman was like, vote on Saturday, people were confused. They just got good with dropping the ballot off at the poll center and asking the question when we sit there all day on voting day and they're like, can I still go? Can it go in the box or do I have to go in? Like, these are legit questions that are being asked on that day, and we're fielding them constantly through the early vote cycle and then on that last leg of the election. And that's what it's concerning for me, because we gave more access, which was wonderful, but we had a super education process. It was almost 4 years, straight up education on that process. And now we're doing a new thing, and I'm concerned. It's not anything against you but there are real things to contend with, and I'm deeply concerned. And so that's my comment, Madam Chair. Thank you for the leeway.
Thank you very much.
Steve Yeager for the record. I'll just, acknowledge that those feelings are legitimate and they're real. I mean, there's not a great solution here, and what it tells me is that you're the kind of legislator we need in this building, a thoughtful one. These decisions are difficult, and I can't really say more than that, other than I appreciate the work you've done to educate voters, and whether this bill passes or not, when voter ID gets implemented, I know you're going to continue that work, as will all of we. But these are tough decisions with competing interests, and so I just acknowledge the legitimacy of those feelings, and thank you for sharing them.
Mr. Thorley, did you have one data point you wanted to weigh in on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Secretary of State's office keeps excellent information on signature cures, which is the error rate, Senator Neal, that you referenced to. And so I was able to pull up the information from the 2024 general election of all the mail ballots cast. Last general election, 32,818 needed a cure. And when I say a cure, either the signature that was on the ballot return envelope didn't match or it was blank. That represents 4.6% of all mail ballots returned. Of that amount, 23,644 were successfully cured. That represents 72% of those that needed cures. So that leaves 9,174 ballots that were not cured, and that represents 1.3% of all ballots returned.
Gabriel Zakara for the record. Thank you so much, Mr. Thorley, for grabbing those. Our team also has an internal working document that lists the reasons for cure. Deputy Secretary Voloshin's finding that right now. I only have a copy for the first part of early vote, and I can say that for that period, for the first part of early voting, fewer than 10% of the mail ballots that needed signature cure was because of a missing signature. So over 90% of the ballots that needed cure were because of a signature mismatch and not a missing signature, which I believe is also part of your question. And I wanted to add on to what Speaker Yeager said as well. We know that the voter education effort is not just going to be coming from the Secretary of State. It's going to be coming from the county clerks because they have to train the poll workers to answer those questions. And I do strongly believe that although there will certainly be growing pains, the information that will come in under this bill for the 2026 election cycle will be invaluable for the 2028 election cycle when we know that turnout will be far higher, there will be more voters, and if we don't know what questions those voters are going to ask before they show up to vote, potentially for the next president of the United States, the stakes are very high with voter education, and any time we can take to help bring voters to what will almost certainly be the new normal of elections in Nevada, the county clerks can really take advantage of that time to bring voters on board with this new process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Buck?
Thank you so much, Chair Dondero Loop. First of all, I think this is very thoughtful and courageous of you to bring this and in a bipartisan way. I know that I think, or close to 70% of voters want this. And more than likely it will pass again in this upcoming election. I think our common goals are that every legitimate voter get to vote and absolutely be able to weigh in on whatever election that they're voting in. I guess because I just received this too, and I want to be a very active listener. How does this address the timeline? I know Nevada's always last, kind of, or near the end to tabulate votes, and that not on anybody's problem. It's nobody's fault. But I just wondered how this legislation addresses that timeline.
Steve Yeager for the record. I appreciate the question. So the Dropbox portion of this bill, I think, is really what's going to help speed up the processing. And I probably should have brought that data, and I can get all of you the data. But I have numbers about how many ballots were put in drop boxes on Election Day in Clark and Washoe. Now, those are just the people that are dropping their ballots off, not the folks who are voting in person. And it's in the tens of thousands of ballots. So what it tells me is that there's almost certainly a need and a demand for drop boxes in that 3-day period. And I'll note as well, so there's nothing in law right now that prevents a county from having a drop box available on those 3 days between 4 days, 3 days. Clark did not have any. And what we saw was, the first day, the voting day in Clark County, I think it was something to the degree of 70,000-ish ballots that got put in the drop box. So remember, those are showing up while they're trying to conduct the election. In Clark, or Washoe was something like 30 to 40,000. But interestingly enough, Washoe did have, I think, at least one location that had a drop box last cycle on those 3 or 4 days. And people dropped their ballots off there. I mean, in the thousands, not the tens of thousands. But so that tells me that if we give that option, people will use it. And we're going to be talking to the voters at the door, and you say, have you voted yet? And they say no. And what you're going to tell them is, go take your ballot in and drop it off. And so I think that's going to happen. And so in the counting process, what that allows folks to do is actually process those ballots because they're showing up before Election Day. And so how many ballots might come in on that weekend, we don't know. But giving the election officials time to collect those and process them before Tuesday Election Day, I think is going to help the process because we're just trying to flatten out that ballot drop box on Election Day. So, that's where you're going to see it sped up. Imagine if Clark, instead of 70,000 ballots put in a drop box in Clark on Election Day, what if it was 15,000? That's a much more manageable number. In addition, I'll say it's not in this bill, but I have presented other bills, and I think one of them is over in the governor's desk, and hopefully he's going to sign it. But that would require the clerks to provide information on a daily basis after the election about how many ballots they still have left to count. Because what happened the last election cycle, and you guys know this too, we had no idea how many ballots were left to count. And the speculation was, maybe it's 100,000 ballots, maybe it's 200,000. And the information that was out there was not helpful. I remember seeing a social media post of a handwritten number on a piece of paper, and everyone was like, well, is that the number of ballots or not? It wasn't an official communication. And the reason that matters is if we know how many ballots are left to count, we can almost certainly call at least the big ticket races, the president, the U.S. Senate, the congressionals. Some of our races are always going to be really close, and so every last ballot's going to come in. But I think flattening the return period with the addition of how many ballots are left, because math is math, and we know if you're up by a certain number of votes and there are only so many ballots to count, we're going to be able to call elections sooner, I think. So this piece of legislation in tandem with other pieces of legislation, I think, are going to speed that process up.
And if I may, one more, Chair. And you're probably going to also say, make sure you have your ID or the last four of your ID when you're at the door. And I can see doing that too, to educate voters. How about voter or ballot harvesting? How is that addressed in here?
Gabriel DeCara, for the record, thank you for the question, Senator Buck. The ballot collection, voter assistance, my understanding is it's unchanged by this legislation. The procedures are the exact same. Your mail ballot has to be filled out properly. It has to be returned in a timely manner if you're assisting another voter with the return of their mail ballot. I did want to circle back to your question about election timeliness and results. Secretary Aguilar has been very outspoken about his desire for getting results out faster as well. As Speaker Yeager said, there are several bills that are looking to address different elements of that this session. One thing that I really want to emphasize, results cannot be announced on election night until polls are closed and the last voter has voted. To Senator Neal's point, and as Speaker Yeager has said, this is going to be a massive voter education effort. If you have voters who are confused about the process, the lines may be longer, and if the lines are longer and it takes those people more time to vote, it will be it very well could be 10, 11 o'clock at night but before those results can get out. And again, that's not a product of this legislation. It's a product of the potential future constitutional amendment. And so, we actually have instituted a process by which all of the results from early voting and mail ballots that arrived before Election Day are all ready to go. But, depending on how long it takes people to vote and those polls to close down, it could be a while before we can get those results out as a product of that amendment. Thank you.
I know, but in 2016, I know it was like 14 days after. I know that was this last election. It wasn't as much, but it still is painful to sit and agonize over. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Taylor?
Thank you.
Senator Stone? Senator Wynn, did you have another comment? Go ahead.
I mean, I think you probably see the frustration, and I know you have that same frustration. I don't think any of us want to be in this position where we are having to undo some of the years of voter education, some of the things that we've done to move, like access to voting, more accessible and easier, and we're able to re-enfranchise people that otherwise weren't voting. However, I do appreciate your kind of measured approach to taking into consideration question 7 and trying to find ways to implement, otherwise what would be probably considered a blunt instrument that we would have to come in here in a very short period of time and try to figure out how to implement. So Thank you. And I just want to clarify, all the days are running together. I did see this morning. I didn't see this last night. I mean, I was in this building until last night, so I don't know when I would have seen it last night. But I think every day is yesterday and every hour is yesterday. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have a quick question. Section 9.3, subsection 2, reads that the Secretary of State may use any remaining money that was previously appropriated from the State General Fund to pay for the cost of the statewide top-down voter registration database and election management system. Can you give me some explanation on not only what that means, but what previous appropriation is being referred to?
Gabriel DeCara, for the record, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So my understanding is the intent of that amendment is the VREMS project, the transition to the top-down system, is which this legislature funded in the previous session and will hopefully approve for funding this session. Because it is a large IT project, and there were a number of questions outstanding, even questions about what legislation will be passed inside this legislative session, which will in turn turn into requirements, which will turn into what kind of resources are expended on that effort. If there are funds outstanding, so for example, this legislative headed into this legislative session, this upcoming fiscal year, the Secretary of State's office was able to revert $4.5 million to the State General Fund because those funds were not expended on that system. I believe the goal of that section of the amendment is to say that if we, the Secretary of State's office, believe that there is a portion of funds that will not be required for the finishing of that project, those funds can be spent on voter education to do a lot of this work that we know has to happen to get voters up to speed on how election law is changing in Nevada. It's a mechanism by which we can kind of do some rapid response switching of funds on voter education without going through the more complicated traditional fiscal process. I hope that was correct, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll go back to Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for a second chance here. And really, it's more of a statement than a comment. First and foremost, I appreciate all the effort you've put into this. And I just had to do some quick fact check on your opening statement regarding many voters decide in that last week. And the reality is, just for everybody listening, that's true. And I was a little surprised at the data that I got to go there, and just want to put this on the record that 45% on a ABC poll last election cycle, 45% of the voters decided in the last month. Actually, 2% decided in the last week, and 4% decided in the last 3 days. And so that's a valid number, and a significant number of people that decide at that last 6% of the population decided within that last week. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Steve Yeager, for the record. That's when we finally worn them down with our mailers and text messages and door visits. But no, to that point, I think that's why it's really important to have those additional options those last 3 days. Like, let's try to get some of those ballots. When they decide and they're ready to vote, let's have an option that doesn't require them to wait 3 days to go drop a ballot in a drop box or vote in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did remember the question that I had, and Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you for your forethoughtfulness in this. And as you stated, many of us aren't happy about being here, but the fact of the matter is that we're here. So I'm grateful to be able to get on the other side of this. It may be question / comment for the Secretary of State's office. So thank you for running in as you did. We really appreciate that. In terms of the voter education, many of us up here have talked about then when we're at the door during those times, being able to tell people go to the ballot, go to the drop boxes, and so on. And certainly my colleague from the South who talked about the research, which I'm sure you're aware of, and who is disenfranchised. And for me, that's the biggest reason why I'm not happy being in voter ID, because I think about who gets disenfranchised. So I would ask if you've done some thinking, if not, if you would, from the Secretary of State's end, is how do we specifically target those groups? Because if we do traditional things, we're going to hit traditional people. Well, the traditional people are not the ones that are disenfranchised. The traditional people are in this room. We're voting, right? We're voting. So those aren't the ones, right? It's the ones that we're happy when they vote. Those who have a heart. I think about my mom. If my mom didn't have me, she wouldn't be able to vote. She wouldn't be able to get to the polls. She wouldn't understand. I think about all of that. So again, question/comment. If you haven't done some thinking and some planning, since we're on the front end about that, well, share your thoughts if you guys have had some. And if not, then I'm asking that you do.
Thank you for the question, Senator Taylor. Gabriel DeCara for the record. Could not agree with you more. I think there will need to be, there already has been significant research on vote method preferences, right? Senator Titus referenced a poll that showed how some voters were thinking about the election. We know that there will need to be research done. I firmly believe, I agree with Speaker Yeager, having legislation so we know how this will be enacted will allow that research to be more specific and will allow us to see what messaging is most effective, who needs that education, right? And then what message works with them. So I could not agree with you more. Secretary Aguilar absolutely wants to take all that research into account, to partner with nonprofit organizations, again, like the Center for Civic Design and others, to be able to communicate this in the most effective way and, to your point, to the correct audience. There's nothing partisan about which voters need to be communicated with. If voters need that education, we have to communicate them regardless. So absolutely, thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Wynn, did you have another comment?
I did. Just kind of the conversation following up with Chair's comment about some of those unspent funds being used, if there are funds available to use for that voter information piece. What kind of requirements do you currently have under HAVA, or that, what is it, Help Americans Vote Act from, I think, President Bush? Do you run those programs through that, or would the money be run through there? Or do you have existing programs that would be able to be supplemented, or would it be pushed down to these county clerks to do this kind of voter education? Like, who does the voter education right now, and who do you anticipate doing this expanded voter education piece and moving on in the future?
Thank you for the question, Senator Wynn. Gabriel DeCara for the record. Again, historically, the Secretary of State office in Nevada has not done a lot of direct voter education. The previous legislative session, we received the most dollars the office had ever received for voter education, and that was $800,000, which absolutely comes in handy. But I think, as a number of folks in this room know, $800,000 is not that much when you need to reach every voter in the state of Nevada, potentially across multiple mediums. So we are grateful for the additional funding now, as well as the opportunity to potentially move some of those funds. Historically, a large portion of that work has been borne by the county clerks, and then voter engagement, civic engagement organizations, like, again, many of the people in this room, many of the people that, as Speaker Yeager said, have been doing this work for a long time. Historically, the state has not played a large role in voter education. Secretary Aguilar wants to step that up. So there are not existing mechanisms. There's not an existing program that we could turn the dial up. But last legislative session, we asked for and were given 2 positions for language access and voter outreach. And the limited work that we've done was done through those positions. Now we have that framework set up, and we can start doing more of that work, branching out tactics, whether that's digital advertising, partnering with our folks in public media for television and radio advertising. Again, whatever methods will speak best to the voters that need to hear this type of education, that's where we want to put the funding. So we would do our best to be incredibly strategic about how those funds are spent. Thank you.
Kind of following up on that and what Senator Taylor said, I think that when I think about this, Senator Taylor's right, our older population has been voting the same way for a long time. So to switch gears is a bigger gear, right? But then when I look at the younger voters, if they're disenfranchised, they don't care, like it doesn't matter. By the way, my signature doesn't match what I wrote when I was 18. So, then I write my signature when I'm 25, and then I write it again when I'm 30. You know what I'm saying? The signature changes. I've watched it change in this building with people. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering how we're going to maneuver all that, and will it be education, or will there be something in place? Like, how are we going to kind of do that within the education part of this?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Gabriel DeCara for the record. Excellent question. I do think that, and again, I commend the speaker for trying to make this legislation as holistic as possible. I do believe that this kind of enabling legislation, again, taking into text the constitutional amendment that cannot be changed, will hopefully cut down on the need for signature cures in the first place, which will address some of those issues, as well as dealing with timeliness. Voters have several days to be able to cure their signatures, which means that, several days before those results could be potentially tabulated. The fewer signature cures, the better, especially as we move into this new age where the younger folks aren't exactly sure what their signature should look like. And I do want to add, in the 2024 general election cycle, Nevada had one of the highest rates of youth turnout in the nation, which I think is a great sign for Nevada's civic engagement. In terms of balancing that education between the older population and the younger population, again, it's going to come down to research. It's going to come down to conversations with our county clerks and their poll workers who have been working in these communities for a long time, who have valuable information about how voters absorb these types of changes, who have seen voters, as things have changed over the last several years, who've had to communicate with them. So I do not disagree that it would be a challenge, but it's something that we have to come at from every direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Any additional questions, comments, concerns? Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had a question on DMV. I don't know if DMV is here, but I started thinking about our budget closings and their ability to roll in, I guess, these additional, I don't even know if it is additional, but I was thinking about how they're currently updating their system and how we're having that long-term trouble that we've been having with the current adaptations that they're having with their rollout of this new system that we extended until, I think, 7 years from now or something, completion.
Gabriel DeCara for the record. Thank you for the question, Senator Neal. I don't want to speak for DMV. I will note that the Secretary of State's office has been working with them on improving our AVR pipeline. We actually just updated it to be in line with the statutory requirements at the beginning of this year. I will say that the initial draft of this bill included an expansion of that AVR pipeline, including the transmittal of a voter's photograph, for example, from DMV to the Secretary of State's office for that top-down system. So it's something that DMV has considered. I spoke with Mr. Sever from the DMV, and he confirmed that when automatic voter registration was first passed, they looked at what it would take, what changes would be necessary in their then existing system to be able to transmit the voter's image. I do not doubt that it would take programming time and resources, but in our initial conversations, I think we are confident that this can happen in this timeline. And I don't know what section it is offhand, but the element of this bill that includes the ability for the Secretary of State to issue a digital ID, that will rely on that information from DMV, on us receiving that photograph, turning that into a digital ID card that a voter can access from their phone. If they happen to forget their driver's license or whatever, they don't have it in person, they'll be able to log in to the voter portal on the Secretary of State's website and have that information. I do not believe that the DMV transition that's currently happening will will have an adverse effect on our ability to carry out this legislation. Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions, comments? All right. Thank you very much. And if you'll step back, we'll go to those who support Assembly Bill 499 here in Carson City, in Las Vegas, and on the phone lines, AVH, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to speak in support of SB 499, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no callers wishing to provide support testimony at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll go to opposition here in Carson City.
I'm Aisha Goins, First Vice President of the NAACP, AESHA-GOINS. I am catching my breath. I'm so disturbed by this bill. The NAACP's mission is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights for all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. I am the second generation of voting rights. What that means is my mother was offered voting rights, and then she had me, and then I could vote. And just the opportunity to be available to that still is impactful in my home. We use the word disenfranchise as if it doesn't mean deprive. And I just want to make sure that we are taking into consideration what it means when you are changing laws that has in the past deprived people access to. And then what the access has done for those persons. Because it's not just about, yes, we're asking for ID. It really has to do with what happens to the person when you show up to vote and then they have to show their ID. That feeling of having to validate themselves for something that they were already given the right to do. And so as we're talking about voter ID in reference to needing to have boxes so that people can count the votes, so that people can feel relieved, I get it. I too want to know who's winning an election, but not at the sacrifice of people. And so the NAACP always weighs in heavy on voter access. And this is no exception. But personally, I am appalled. So we do not support this, and I hope that you don't either. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Dondero-Loop and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Emily Prasad Zamora, and that is spelled PERSAUD-ZAMORA. I have the honor of being the Executive Director of Silver State Voices, and I'm here on behalf of our coalition as Silver State Voices and the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition in strong opposition of AB 499. I have this really cool, fancy testimony here, and I'm supposed to read it right now. But what I'm thinking about is the fact that our coalition was created in 2015 when this same body, under all Republican leadership, tried to pass a voter ID bill. And here we are again in 2025 having this conversation. I am appalled. I cannot even believe that we are here having this discussion about voter ID. I get it. I've been doing this work for quite some time, and we had a ballot initiative that qualified, I want to mention, legally in the month of July, that only provided folks about 3 months to really educate themselves on the topic. So I just want to leave that little tidbit here. we're going to create a solution to a problem that does not exist. And we're actually taking the ability away from the voters in 2026 to really decide whether they want this or not. That's not democracy. That's why we have a ballot initiative process, so that the voters themselves can actually choose whether they want this policy. We are outraged as a coalition, and our coalition is on the ground every day. We have over 24 organizations that are diverse in the communities that they work with and the issues that they are talking with constituents, Nevadans, each and every day, whether that's housing, education, the rise of costs. And our coalition is here today to remind you all that this is not what voters want. When they actually go through and go to an elections vote center, and they're going to go through that same process that Ms. Goins just talked about, it is going to be a dehumanizing process. We know that because we run election protection programs every single election throughout the entire state of Nevada in all 17 counties. And the questions that we get from rural folks that live in Elko to folks that live in North Las Vegas or Henderson, there are questions that they don't fully understand the voting process, and this is just going to disseminate democracy for those people. I urge you to vote no on this amendment.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, first name spelled Athar, last name Haseebullah. I serve as the Executive Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada. I'm a civil rights attorney by background. Also, we're the lead participants of providing lawyers for election protection statewide, every election, as my colleague pointed out, in every county. It is difficult to even discuss this proposal right now, in part because we spend every election oftentimes listening to many of you all talking about championing voting rights. So to come with a proposal on voter ID, a proposal that was rooted deeply in segregation and Jim Crow, and then asking communities to support it through some sort of unusual strategy to preempt a potential ballot question that might pass, from voters I talk to, even as a nonpartisan organization, who are Democratic voters that would view this as a concession, that you won't fight for their rights, that you'd be willing to see a ballot question that may or may not end up passing in an attempt to preempt that by actually just imposing what conspiracy theorists have pushed with respect to voter fraud is a disgrace. Nobody, not one single Democrat I've ever spoken to believes that's what the Democratic Party should have ever stood for. And that's why this is particularly hard. Moreover, the fact that this is brought in the last 3 days of session on such a key issue, this isn't an ingenious solution to cut something off. It's a show of weakness. And we, as a coalition, do not support this. The ACLU does not support this. It's ripe for issues, and I understand the attempt to have some level of political calculus here, but it's in fact not that. It's a betrayal of the communities we serve, of the organizations that fight for voting rights every day, that have to go out into the community and work alongside to protect voting rights in the face of conspiracy theories. What a vote here would mean, a yes vote here would mean, is that we're on our own. Because really what we've boiled down to is leaders who have come to our communities and told us that they're going to do work on our behalf, and instead will betray us, and those that just blindly support conspiracy theories and don't have the gumption and the heart to fight back. The final thing I'll say is there's a lot of ballot questions that come forward. Which other rights will be betrayed? If there's a right to repro that ends up coming forward, are we going to be betrayed because we don't think it's going to pass? If there's a right to protect individual liberties, will that happen? This is a telltale sign of where things are. So we urge rejection here. Every compromise isn't a good one. And I recognize that's a favored term in this body. But the notion that we should compromise on issues like this, it gives me great concern. I'd ask you to wonder, and I'd actually wonder myself, what would happen if we continue to use that rhetoric and then something like the 3/5 compromise pops up before this body, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Alexander Marks with the Nevada State Education Association. We'd like to echo the view of our national affiliate, the National Education Association, who does a lot of work on this issue. Voter suppression is not a relic of the past. It's happening right now, and every day educators across the country are introducing our students to the principles of democracy. Voter identification laws may seem like common sense, but in practice, they are modern barriers to the ballot box, disproportionately affecting Black, Brown, Indigenous, young, disabled, and rural voters with limited DMV access in Nevada. Our union has criticized modern tactics like this, requiring voters to show ID, and it's among the methods that replace historical barriers like poll taxes and literary tests. These laws solve no problems, but create very real obstacles, and democracy depends on access, not exclusion. And we must reject the misleading narrative advanced by those who seek to narrow access to the ballot and limit who gets to say in our shared future. With AB 499, our previous gold standard set by Nevada will start to look like fool's gold. NSCA didn't take a formal position on question 7, but personally, I voted for question 7. I think trying to defeat that measure in 2026 before waving any white flags on this issue is the best path forward. Question 3 passed in 2022, but failed in 2024. If we put in the work, we can flip the narrative and we can win, and we don't have to be here worrying about voter IDs. This body has the opportunity to show why democracy works and why it matters, and we should oppose Assembly Bill 499. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Leo Murrieta. I'm the Executive Director of Make the Road Nevada. I represent over 41,000 hardworking Nevadans all across the state. And on January 23rd of 2010, at about 2:30 in the afternoon, I became an American citizen. And the first thing I did was burst into tears, because that was something I wanted to do more than anything, to become an American citizen, to call myself an American, and to gain the right to vote. I've always wanted to serve on a jury. This is what I wanted. My family came to this country when I was 7 days old. I grew up in downtown Las Vegas. This reminds me of my first election, which was June of 2010. I went to go vote with my mother. And I remember standing in that line, which, by the way, was over an hour and a half long, outside of Cardenas. I was holding my mother's hand because I was really nervous. Would they let me vote? I only just became a citizen. Will my information be there? Will I be able to cast a ballot? My mother, who had voted in every election since becoming a citizen in the year 2000, she assured me, mijo, en este país, nuestro voto cuenta. My son, in this country, our vote counts. Tenemos el derecho para estar aquí. No temes. We have the right to be here. Don't be afraid. But I was afraid. And I grabbed my ID out of my wallet and I said, well, what if? I don't know. What if they don't have my full name? What if they just have, I don't know what happens. And my mother held my hand tight. In the year 2010, I was frightened to go vote. I didn't know if this country would respect my right as an immigrant, as a new American, to cast my ballot. In that same election, I also helped my mother vote because she doesn't read English well. And I represent thousands of voters who have that same fear. And we talk to them every election cycle. During COVID, we saw so many Latinos on the East Side turned away because either they didn't have the right documentation, they didn't have the right information, they couldn't speak the language. Even in our elections today, we have issues of language access on the East Side of Las Vegas. This bill is a problem. It has an impact on immigrant voters. It has an impact on new Americans. If this bill were in place in 2010, I don't know if I would have had the courage to go vote. I don't know if I would have had the courage to stand there and potentially have my right questioned. I am an immigrant to this country. I am an American citizen. I am an advocate for democracy, and Make the Road is a proud member of the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition. We oppose this bill. I oppose this bill, not just for the countless people who are going to feel the same fear that I did in 2010, but for the pure reason that we can prevent this fear for countless more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Carrie Durmick. It's KERRYDURMICK with All Voters Local Action. I strongly oppose the voter ID amendment in 499. I ditto everything my previous colleagues and partners have said before me, but I want to also offer a different perspective. In 2020, we had a devastating pandemic in this state, and we were able to implement a universal vote-by-mail system in months before our elections. There is no reason that we cannot wait until 2026 to let voters decide on this measure and implement this then. We should not implement something for no good reason to harm voters and potentially disenfranchise them before this is decided in the 2026 election. Additionally, this is an extremely disappointing and reckless move that will harm our democracy and endanger Nevadans' ability to vote, and this will lock out eligible and registered Nevadans. Every day, Nevadans will be locked out of voting. I strongly urge you to vote no on this measure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Chair John Daraloop, members of the Senate Committee on Finance, Isaac Tenorio with Triad 260, on behalf of Campaign Legal Center. Campaign Legal Center opposes the amendment to AB 499 that would institute a strict voter ID system in Nevada. The provisions of this legislation would unquestionably disenfranchise eligible Nevadan voters, especially those populations who have historically struggled to access the ballot box. Young people, communities of color, and unhoused individuals, and disabled voters. Nevadans without valid identification will need to jump through additional hurdles to make their voices heard in the polls, spending valuable time, resources, and monies that they may not have to track down documents and identifications before Election Day. There will be those, of course, for whom obtaining identification is simply out of the question. There is no evidence that implementing these additional hurdles will make Nevada's elections inherently safer or more secure. Our democracy works best when we can all participate, but this amendment will roll back a system that has been presided over years of successful elections in Nevada and threaten Nevada's voters, a system that we have grown accustomed to. This bill inherently threatens voting rights in Nevada that we have enjoyed for most of our lives. This amendment would immediately harm both the number of votes and the diversity of voters, undermine recent legislative efforts ensuring that all eligible voters can participate in our democracy. CLC urges you to vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Olivia Tanager. I'm here on behalf of the Sierra Club Toyabe chapter. We are the largest grassroots environmental organization in the state of Nevada. And I want to talk about what grassroots means for a second. Grassroots means that we are powered by community members. So every election cycle, we go out and we educate voters on how to cast their ballot and how to vote. We are a community-powered organization, and so that's why I'm up here, even though it might not seem obvious why an environmental organization is up here in opposition to this amendment. Further, we go out into the rurals every every political cycle, and we make sure that folks in the rurals know how to access the ballot and know what's at stake. And that's what I'm really concerned about here, and what I wanted to get up and talk about, because I haven't been able to confirm that any folks who are out in the rurals are able to give testimony today, and any of our tribal allies were able to give testimony today. We know that there are huge barriers for folks in tribal communities, for folks in Native communities already in casting their ballot in the state of Nevada. And I'm very concerned about what voter ID would do for disenfranchising voters out in rural Nevada as well. And so with that, we are in strong but respectful opposition and urge your opposition as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Cassie Charles, CASSIE, on behalf of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, or AFSCME. I am here today in strong opposition of the amendment to this bill. And I want to remind this body that we are a state and we are a body who has fought and worked tirelessly over the last several years, the last several sessions, to expand our access to democracy. We cannot now go back on our word that we have given countless times to the constituents in this state. We are also a state currently. We are currently in a legislative session with limited resources. We cannot spend those resources on walking back on our promises to Nevada. We cannot spend those limited resources on walking back rights for members of our community. We strongly urge your opposition here. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
For the record, Brooke Malath. There's some unique obstacles that voter ID provides for transgender voters. There's difficulty in updating identification documents. There's a big risk of discrimination and harassment, and there's also a huge risk of disenfranchisement. All of these different laws place a cost and a burden, if not for money, at least for time, in being able to update certain types of ID, being able to get these IDs. There are certain requirements that are really necessary, that are in language that is included in this bill. Particularly, why do we have to identify sex as in an identification for voting? Think about it. Are we opening the door for genital inspections to be able to prove one's sex? If there's a mismatch between the sex marker and the picture on the photo ID, is this going to create an obstacle for that individual to be able to vote? We need to be able to cut out that kind of nonsense. If we're here and we have a right to vote, we don't need another obstacle because somebody's internal bias does not want to evaluate that, who our identity is based on a gender marker mismatch or their identification of, oh, well, you don't look like your picture because now you have, you look more male or you look more female than what I think your picture looks like. This creates an awful way to be able to diminish the rights of transgender voters that I don't think anyone has thought of. So, in its current form, we have to vote against this bill.
Thank you very much. Any additional opposition here in Carson City? I'll go to Las Vegas. Opposition, please.
Good morning, Chair Dundera-Loop. I was actually here for support, so I was wondering if we could move that to support.
We're going to do our phone lines first.
Of course.
So you'll just have to hang tight, please. All right. Phone lines, please. AVH, when you are ready.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to testify in opposition to AB 499, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Kimberly Fergus, FERGUS, and I'm here to say absolutely no to AB 499. Please. This bill was dropped last minute, and I'm stuck pulling amendments from the Indy because they weren't posted for us to see. Does this even matter? Do our voices count anymore, or have the side deals already been made? This is the worst bill I've ever seen. It centralizes control, dumps costs on counties, and creates ID hurdles for voters. It's rushed, it's wrong, and it's everything that erodes trust in the process. Please vote no on AB 499. Thank you. Have a good day.
We can go to the next caller, and I'd remind callers to please state and spell your name before you speak.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Quentin Savoy. That's Quentin. Last name is Savoy, S like Sam, A like Apple, V like Victor, WOIR. I'm the president of the Las Vegas branch of the NAACP. I want to plus one everything that my first vice president said, but also articulate my profound disappointment that this has come up in the last 72 hours of the legislative session, particularly from elected leaders who I know personally. I have organized people and tried to compel to knock doors and get involved in the process and have a relationship with your legislator. This erodes trust in our community, and it is a slap in the face to our foremothers and our forefathers who have fought and given their lives in many instances for voting rights. We've had a lot of conversation today about the insurmountable task of the public education, and we're just going to lose. Well, newsflash for you folks, we're going to lose when we don't try. We are always going to lose when we don't try. And in the neighborhoods and the communities that I organize in, that's what they associate mostly with Democrats, that Democrats don't try to profoundly change their lives. It's extremely disappointing to hear that this has come up at such a last minute at a time where we are seeing waves of taking away rights and waves of strongman authoritarianism. This is not okay. Further, since we've decided that we're already going to lose, and since we've decided that this is going to be a theme, I would like to know why we haven't had a discussion about trying to make the requisite documents that it takes to get an ID more accessible. Birth certificates should be free. We should be leaving the vital statistics office open later hours, because you know what, they're open now from 7 a.m. to 5. The people I work alongside and I organize, they are at work during those times too. So I just think we can be more comprehensive in how we're approaching this if we're truly trying to be as accessible and making this as easy and headed off the path, or whatever the term was that was used in this committee earlier. Thank you so much for your time today. I urge you to vote no.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. My name is Jim DeGraffenreid, DeGraffenreid. I am Nevada's Republican National Committeeman, here today in opposition to AB 499. We have stated in previous testimony that we oppose the reduced signature verification in this bill. We oppose the additional drop boxes that are in the amendment. Obviously, the Nevada Republican Party, like 70% of Nevadans in the last election, is fully in favor of voter ID. We understand that that does not, as has been stated earlier, reduce voter turnout. In fact, studies in states like Virginia, Georgia, Texas have shown increased rates of participation after voter ID laws are put into place. But because of the other things in this bill, we reluctantly need to remain in opposition. Thank you.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tara Webster, TARAWEBSTER, on behalf of the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, in strong opposition to AB 499. Our democracy is strongest when everyone's voice is heard, and with one desperate amendment submitted at the 11th hour of the legislative session, this amendment is undoing more than a decade of voter protection and expansion. Regardless of the success of the Question 7 ballot initiative, voter ID and other voting barriers have their roots in the Jim Crow South. And this amendment contradicts and undermines progressive legislation that we've seen proposed this session that was intended to lower these barriers to voting. Things like expanding DMV hours for same-day voter registration, guaranteeing timely receipt of sample ballots and informed voting decisions, increasing ballot box access, and prohibiting intimidation and violence at polling locations. This amendment isn't simply trying to get ahead of what could happen in the future. It's a step back towards progress we've made. And lawmakers must do more to govern and push back against election misinformation and policy that's just going to disenfranchise some of the most vulnerable blocks of voters. And we really urge a no vote on this amendment.
Good morning, Chair Dondera Loop and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Becker, ELIZABETH, Becker with a B as in boy, ECKER. As a former Clark County voter registrar a presidential caucus site lead, and a volunteer election observer, I am strongly opposed to AB 499. We already have very strong protections in Nevada that deter voter fraud, and signature verification works. The argument that this bill is being brought to preempt the passage in 2026 of the voter ID ballot initiative is deeply flawed. First, we have no way of knowing if that ballot initiative will in fact pass. In 2022, voters approved the open primaries ballot initiative by 43 to 47%, and then voted against it in 2024 by the same margin. After, tens of millions of dollars flowed into the state to oppose it. Using this argument is tantamount to saying we should have just abandoned the Civil Rights Act in 1964 because a majority of voters opposed that. Not everything that is right, good, and supported by data is popular. The constitutional right to vote is sacrosanct. We have done an amazing job in Nevada of making access to voting a top priority. I moved here from South Carolina over 20 years ago, and I have always been able to vote early in Nevada. If I still lived in South Carolina, I would have to vote in my precinct and only on election day. Anyone wishing to register to vote already has to present a photo ID and prove residency. There is no need to require that every single time people vote. I also want to ditto all of the beautiful and powerful opposition testimony before me and urge you to please do not use voter ID requirements at the polls as a bargaining chip with the governor, who I will remind you vetoed 75 bills last session. He is not to be trusted. Please vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tristan St. Dennis. It's TRYSTIN_DENIS. I am the Policy Associate for the Nevada Conservation League. The Nevada Conservation League envisions a future where all Nevadans can thrive because they have access to a healthy climate, clean air, clean water, and outdoor spaces, as well as a safe, healthy, and sustainable community. We understand that this vision isn't possible without a fair and inclusive democracy. For that reason, we stand in opposition to any policy that would make it harder for everyday Nevadans to access the ballot box. This amendment will disenfranchise many Nevadans from participating in the election process, so we ask that the committee oppose. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 030. You are unmuted on our end. Please check to see that you are not muted on yours.
Good morning, Chair Dondera Loop and committee members. My name is William Moore, spelled WILLIAMMOORE, and I'm the Nevada Civic Engagement Director with Mi Familia en Acción. Mi Familia en Acción is a civic engagement organization with a mission to build Latino political power through year-round community action, and a proud member of the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition. We stand in opposition of AB 499 because it attempts to fix a non-existent problem with expensive solutions. Voter fraud in Nevada is extremely rare and already addressed through existing safeguards. Adding more barriers to our voting process will only disenfranchise voters, particularly seniors, Latinos, and underserved communities. Mi Familia en Acción stands firmly against this bill because Nevadans deserve leaders who protect voting rights, not undermine them with unnecessary restrictions. We respectfully urge the committee to reject SB 422. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kanale Ainuu, spelled KENALEAINUU, and I am a community organizer with One API in Nevada, a grassroots nonprofit that advocates for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders in Nevada. And I am calling today in opposition of Assembly Bill 499. The proposed AB 499 amendment establishes restrictive voter ID requirements that will create unnecessary barriers that disproportionately impact immigrant and limited English proficient voters in Nevada's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities. As one of the fastest growing racial groups in Nevada, our communities have played a critical role in recent elections, yet we continue to face systemic barriers to voting. Barriers that voter ID laws only make worse. Similar policies in other states have had harmful consequences on the electoral process. ID validation processes are often inconsistent, confusing, and unevenly enforced across polling places, which leads to voter disenfranchisement and reduce participation in our democracy. Nevada already has strong safeguards in place to protect election integrity, and these voter ID requirements are, as Speaker Yeager himself said in the 2023 session, quote unquote, a solution in search of a problem. This amendment only adds confusion and discourages participation, especially for our most vulnerable communities. We urge this committee to reject AB 499's proposed amendment and ensure our elections remain accessible, secure, and fair for all Nevadans. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ellen Gifford, ELLENGIFF as in Frank, ORD as in David. I oppose this bill for many reasons, but voter ID is not one of them, and it must be shared that the tone of the discussion that has just taken place could be that of people who have never heard of voter ID, and it is shocking. Voter ID is certainly nothing new. It's been used for a very, very long time in many states. It works, and millions of people have voted that way for years and never minded it at all. It does not and never has prevented responsible citizens from voting. Voter ID is essential to fair and honest elections. That's why Nevadans voted positively for voter ID to be on the ballot. It is the duty of election officials to implement laws that the people support. That is the work they are paid to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Shelby Swartz, SHELBIE, SWARTZ, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are here today to oppose this amendment because we know the truth that voter ID laws do not prevent fraud, they prevent voting. They turn the fundamental right to vote into a maze of paperwork and obstacles. For a mom juggling 2 jobs or a senior who doesn't drive anymore, that can be the difference between being heard and being erased. Nevada's elections are already secure. What this amendment adds isn't protection, it would be punishment, and it's wrong. Every Nevadan deserves the freedom to vote without jumping through hoops designed to keep them out. Moreover, I want to echo what Liz Becker said, that trying to bargain with a governor who has set a record of vetoing 75 bills in a single session is a losing game. He has demonstrated a clear pattern of rejecting legislation that expands access and equity, making it evident that compromise is not to be trusted. Thank you all for your consideration, and I hope you will reject this amendment.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Caleb Green for the record, CALEB-GREEN. I'm the president of the Las Vegas chapter of the National Bar Association, also known as the LVNBA. And on behalf of the LVNBA, we are in opposition to this amendment to AB 499 that would institute voter ID requirements. As many of you know, the LVNBA is the largest affiliate, is an affiliate chapter of the National Bar Association, which is the largest organization of Black attorneys, judges, and legal professionals worldwide. First and foremost, this bill is being introduced with a couple days remaining in the legislative session. And that timeline is not only unreasonable, it's deeply concerning, especially in the policymaking process. It deprives the public and key stakeholders of the opportunity to meaningfully review, analyze, and provide input on sweeping changes to Nevada's voting laws. This is unacceptable, and I want to echo what the president of the NAACP stated in his opposition testimony, that this is a gross erosion of trust from our elected officials and the authors of this amendment. Moreover, it's poor policymaking. Stakeholders need to be at the table and have an opportunity to provide input on this important legislation. The fact that we're here on a Saturday addressing this last-minute amendment concerning one of our most sacred rights, the right to vote in Nevada, makes it clear that this is not how this legislation should be enacted. Equally troubling and disappointing is the exclusion of the LVNBA from the development of this amendment. The LVNBA has been consistent in a constructive voice in shaping policy legislation in Nevada, and our exclusion from this process is not only a disservice to the legal community, it's a disservice to the underrepresented communities that we also represent. None of our members have had an opportunity to review this amendment in detail or have any conversations about the policy implications with its drafters. Lastly, most importantly, this amendment opens the door to voter suppression. This amendment strikes us as a solution in search of a problem. And in the interest of time, I just want to echo the concerns expressed by those who have opposed this amendment. We urge this committee to reject the amendment, and we encourage the sponsors of this amendment to reach out to the LVMBA and all stakeholders to ensure proper policy making takes place moving forward. To quote Coach Prime, the LVMBA is not hard to find, and I look forward to hearing from the authors of this amendment. We oppose this bill, and we urge you reject it. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Dondera-Lupe and members of the committee. My name is Brenda Zamora. That's BRENDA-ZAMORA, and I'm the Deputy Director of Make It Work Nevada. As a reproductive justice organization and members of the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition, we are in opposition to AB 499, which includes an amendment that would implement new voter ID requirements in our state. Reproductive justice is rooted in the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent in safe and sustainable communities. That vision cannot be realized if access to the ballot box is restricted. Voter ID requirements create unnecessary barriers to participation in our democracy, which in turn undermines the ability of marginalized communities to influence policies that directly impact their reproductive health, rights, and lives. I would like to add that it's also very disappointing to hear presenters mention partners in the room who have done the work, but there was no conversation prior to this hearing. We urge this committee to oppose AB 499 and instead to continue to protect the rights for all Nevadans to vote. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Jessica Munger, M-U-N-G-E-R, from Silver State Equality, Nevada's statewide LGBTQ+ civil rights organization. We are in strong opposition to AB 499 with the proposed voter ID amendment for the same reasons we've always been opposed to voter ID laws. Voter ID laws disenfranchise many, and this is especially of concern for LGBTQ+ voters. As you heard a little bit about before, data from the HRC's voter experience survey show that issues with meeting voter identification requirements led approximately a quarter of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color LGBTQ+ adults, over half of transgender adults, and more than 60% of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color transgender adults to either choose not to vote or to be unable or ineligible to vote in at least one election in their lifetime. In this particular amendment, proposed sex is listed in the ID requirements, which creates risks to transgender individuals outing themselves if pictures don't fully match their appearance. These ID appearance and sex mismatch problems for trans and gender queer voters, along with the many, many already stated reasons you've heard from coalition partners, are reasons we strongly oppose this deeply disappointing amendment. Let's use our power and strategy and political capital to confront this amendment, confront this this ballot initiative rather than succumbing to it. Let's try. I think if these are unprecedented times, let's use unprecedented courage. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sue Birch, S-U-E, B as in boy, U-R-T as in Tom, C-H. I am the Executive Director of the Nevada chapter of the National Organization for Women. We strongly oppose AB 499, especially the voter ID amendment, for all the reasons given in testimony by our coalition partners. We urge you to reject AB 499. Thank you and have a good day.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Falasha Parlin Watson. For the record, that's F-A-L-A-S-H-A, last name P-A-R-L-I-N-W-A-T-S-O-N. And I'm the director here in Nevada with Care in Action and the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Our organizations represent and advocate for the rights and dignity of domestic workers, both here in Nevada and throughout the country, who are primarily women of color. I'm calling in today to express our relentless and unwavering opposition to this and any and all legislation establishing voter ID requirements, which we are all well aware will inevitably lead to the further inequitable disenfranchisement of low-income Black and brown voters, including our members. To watch legislators before me
who worked so tirelessly during previous sessions to be able to proudly declare Nevada one of the safest and most accessible states for voters, now contemplating moves in the opposite direction is disheartening, to say the least. I implore you all to stand up for what's right and reject this bill and its inevitable and undeniable voter suppression tactic, the effects of which no concessions, including the promise of a free voter ID mechanism, can truly mitigate. Please don't succumb to the pressure.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Matthew Wilkie, Matthew Wilkie. For the record, and I do not represent an organization or a group. I'm just a regular voting Nevadan calling in opposition to AB 499. For respect for your time, I will ditto those commenters in opposition, especially those of Quentin and Mr. Asibula. If this vote does pass next election, it passes. Let the voters please decide and don't usurp that right from them. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Charles Olander, Charles I'm an organizer with Planned Parenthood Advocates Marmonte and also a proud member of the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition. I would like to ditto the comments from my coalition members and strongly urge you to oppose Assembly Bill 499. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Matilda Miller. That's Mathilda Government Relations Director of Native Voters Alliance Nevada, and we're in strong opposition to Assembly Bill 499. Let me be clear, there is no widespread voter fraud that voter ID would fix. Out of over 1 billion ballots cast, only 31 cases of impersonation were found. This amendment isn't about preventing fraud or election integrity. It's about suppressing turnout. While the amendment includes language recognizing tribal IDs and allocates funding for free state-issued identifications, these concessions do not make this policy equitable. The inclusion of tribal IDs may appear to address concerns, but in practice, Native voters often encounter poll workers who may be unfamiliar with the diversity of valid tribal identification. This burden does not fall on the state to ensure access. It falls on the voter to prove their legitimacy, and that sets a dangerous precedent. As Native people, we understand the power and meaning of identity. Our names, our histories, and our homelands are rooted in generations of belonging. But identity should never be weaponized to deny eligible voters, their voice. The legislature has a responsibility to invest in policies that extend access to democracy. If you care about fairness, justice, and the right to be heard, then this bill should set off alarm bells. This isn't about a piece of ID. It's about whether a democracy truly represents all of us or just the ones who can jump through a maze of barriers to vote. It's about whether we're okay with silencing the voices that have fought to be heard the hardest. We urge you to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Amber Falgo. For the record, AMBERFALGOUT. I am calling in my personal capacity to strongly oppose the amendment to AB 499. This is unconscionable. To bring this amendment 3 days before the end of a legislative session is unacceptable. It subverts democracy and participation in our legislative process. I am honestly at a loss. Claiming to champion voting rights and then moving to a voter ID system that will inevitably disenfranchise voters makes no sense. The evidence is clear. Voter ID laws disenfranchise voters. Look at what happened in Texas. Millions of voters disenfranchised due to a similar law. Appeasing conspiracy theorists at the expense of voters is not only a bridge too far, it is wholly unacceptable. I urge your no votes on this amendment.
Hello, members of the committee. My name is Paula Luna, Paula-Luna, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Institute for Progressive Nevada. IPN works tirelessly with partners each cycle to educate voters. AB 499's amendment would make that a major hurdle and unnecessarily blockades to our voters to have their voice heard. A fair and true democracy requires access to the ballot box, and this bill disenfranchises voters. We echo the statements of opposition heard before, and we urge you all to vote against AB 499. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Is it afternoon? Oh, I got 1 minute. What a beautiful Saturday. Sorry, we're all here. This is Anna Marie Binder, ANNAMARIEBINDER, and I just wanted to stand in solidarity with all the previous opposition spoken before me. Thank you.
If you have recently joined us or have yet to speak and would like to testify in opposition to AB 499, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Hello, this is Melissa Clement, MELISSACLEMENT. Just checking, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I rise in strong opposition to many portions of this bill, but I do have to say I'm very much in favor of voter ID. It is the simplest way, and that we can make sure that everybody feels comfortable with voting and that their vote is counted, and that only those who should be voting in Nevada are voting. But I also have to add, it is with extreme glee that I have listened to the opposition of this bill, because they've had for years, which is that process is important. Bringing stakeholders to the table is important. And as the representative of Nevada Right to Life, I don't think there's too many people in the building who can speak to these particular issues. For example, in 2019, the closing moments of the session, a constitutional amendment was dropped without asking any stakeholder to get involved. We played a hide and seek, trying to find a hearing to where the hearing was, when the hearing was. It was done over the weekend. It was not posted, like so many things. Look, folks, process is important, because otherwise Nevadans across the board do not trust the system, which is so sad. You have 120 days, more than enough time to process important issues that Nevadans face every single day. And yet we have, 85 days where nothing gets done. And then at the last minute, when there's no Nevadans available to come and give their testimony, the most important things are dealt with. Please consider changing the way.
Thank you very much. We cannot hear you, so you must be on the move. Thank you very much. Next caller, please, AVH.
Yes.
Good afternoon. This is Iris Stone, IRISSTONE. I support voter ID alongside 73% of voters who approved this ballot initiative last year. However, I do not support that this last-minute amendment expands the ability to have mail ballot drop boxes after early voting and before Election Day, which amounts to 3 extra days. What problem are we solving here? Certainly not voter access. Mail ballots can be mailed in or dropped off for a period of 4 weeks. Early voting lasts for 2 weeks, and you can use a drop box, and then there's Election Day. Adding these 3 days to the election cycle encourages last-minute ballot collection or ballot harvesting. Since partial election results are available during this time, it's easy to estimate the range of ballots required to win a race. Behavior like this was outlawed outlawed prior to 2021. Let's go back to those statutes, and let's not add to this phenomenon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think that's our last caller, AVH.
If you have recently joined us and would like to testify in opposition to AB 499, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no more callers wishing to provide opposition testimony at this time.
Thank you very much. We'll go to neutral here in Carson City. And not seeing any, we'll go to Las Vegas. Go ahead, please, at the table.
Can I testify in support, Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Dunderloop and members of the committee. My name is Anahit Baghshetsan. For the record, that is ANAHIT BAGHSHETSYN, and I'm a policy analyst at Nevada Policy. Today we come in support of the amendment that was introduced to AB 499. While we echo some of the technical concerns that we heard in the opposition with the very nitty-gritty language, overall, the way that the bill functions and is written with the amendment, we believe would be a net positive with the implementation of voter ID and would also be in line with what the voters voted for in the 2024 election with an overwhelming majority of over 70%. Voter ID laws, as we heard before, are not necessarily a deterrent from voting. Rather, they're a way to keep clear rules and accurate voter rolls that would increase transparency and belief in the local democracy. So for those reasons, we urge the committee to support this bill and implement this piece of legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more in Las Vegas, we'll go to the phone lines in neutral.
If you would like to testify in the neutral position for AB 499, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no callers wishing to provide neutral testimony at this time.
Thank you very much. And with that, Speaker Yeager, would you like to make some final comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Gabriel DeCara for the record. Secretary Aguilar has often said that voter ID is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Nevada's elections are secure. But he's also said that it's his job to respect the will of the voters. And this past election, voters overwhelmingly supported Question 7, including not just 70% of voters in all 17 counties, but at least 60% of voters in every Assembly and Senate district. We understand the concerns of this body, as well as the concerns of the hardworking advocates who've been doing the important work of voter education here in Nevada for many years. Speaker Yeager is attempting to be proactive and strategic by introducing this amendment, and the Secretary of State's office will work to help voters and election administrators through this process to keep Nevada's elections as accessible as possible. Thank you.
I'm Steve Yeager for the record. I want to thank you, Chair, and the committee for hearing this. I know we are in the waning days of session. It has been a long hearing, and I also want to thank all those who participated. You know, this obviously generates very strong feelings, and I acknowledge that. And the attempt here is, in fact, to implement this in a way that respects the fact that we're going to have to do this at some point, and we ought to be as responsible as we can do it and make sure that folks have as many options as possible in terms of how to cast their vote, as well as know how the rules will be changing. So just, Chair, thank you and the committee members, and I would ask for your positive consideration of Assembly Bill 499.
Thank you very much. All right. And with that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 499. We are going to recess, and we will be back later, hopefully, with some bill hearings after we have been to the floor. Thank you very much.